They walked into my house like I didn't exist. A stamp, a signature, a fake smile from a lawyer, and suddenly my life fit into one box. Neighbors watched. Police turned away. The judge didn't even lift his eyes. I said nothing. I just walked out. When they throw you to the street, you either break or you are reborn. I chose the second. While they poured concrete over my family's land, I built something else. Silence, proof, leverage. I didn't beg. I didn't fight. I documented, recorded, learned. They thought they stole my home. They were just funding my transformation. I didn't come back to ask. I came back to take everything they thought was theirs. I didn't disappear. I studied. 6 months. 6 months of cold mornings, cheap coffee, and law books stacked higher than my pride. I learned every clause they used against me. Every loophole they abused. Every surname tied to every signature. If they wanted a fight in court, I'd give them a war. But not loud. Not messy. Not like they expected. Revenge without discipline is just anger. They counted on anger. What they never expected was patience. I slept in a rented room above a mechanic's shop. Concrete walls, iron bed, single bulb swinging whenever trucks rolled by. Not a home, but a cocoon. I worked nights at a gas station. Work didn't matter, time did. And time was sharpening me like a blade. People looked at me and saw a man starting over. I looked in the mirror and saw a man coming back. One evening, I drove past my old property. The gate was new. Tall steel. Shiny security cameras, the kind developers installed to feel invincible. The bulldozers were asleep under tarp. Concrete pillars were already growing out of the earth like tombstones. My land didn't look mine anymore. But I didn't feel loss. Not anymore. I felt calculation. Standing there, behind a half-dead oak tree, I whispered, "Every empire falls the moment it forgets who watched it rise." I wasn't planning chaos. I was planning evidence. And I already had my first threat. His name was Petrovsky, head of the developer's legal team. Greedy. Comfortable. Arrogant. He moved like a man who thought laws were decorations. He made a mistake. He signed one set of papers on a Sunday. Courthouse doesn't work Sundays. One signature, sloppy, rushed, was all I needed to start unraveling them. Fraud always starts with paper. And fraud always ends with it too. I gathered receipts, recordings, screenshots, timestamps. Then I sent one message. To whom it may concern, I believe you're investigating property fraud in the region. I have evidence. Not to the police. Never go to the police first. That's where corruption sleeps comfortably. I sent it to a small anti-corruption journalist. Young, hungry, unbought. We met in a crowded cafe. No windows on the street side, perfect. She sat with a recorder hidden in her sleeve and eyes that had seen enough lies to recognize truth. "Why now?" she asked. "Because silence has matured," I replied. She blinked, confused, intrigued. I slid the folder across the table. Dates. Photos. Copies of illegal approvals. Audio recordings of informal meetings. She opened the first page. Her breath stalled. "This," she whispered, "is real. It's only the first layer." She looked at me differently then, not as a man who lost a home but as a man capable of taking it back. "They won't go down quietly," she warned. "I don't need them quiet," I said. "I need them exposed." We didn't shake hands. Handshake is a promise. This was inevitability. I walked out and breathed winter air like fuel. Next step wasn't proof, it was pressure. Corruption hates daylight. I planned to drown them in it. I called the development company's office. Reception picked up with corporate cheerfulness. "Hello, you've reached Silverstone Development, how may I?" "You stole my home," I said calmly. "I hope your legal department sleeps well tonight." Silence. Then a nervous voice. "Sir, tell your boss the foundation he's pouring is cracking." I hung up. Not a threat, a notification. Fear works best when no one knows when the strike comes. Later that week, I found the judge who signed my eviction. He was at a charity dinner, smiling, shaking hands, pretending to be clean. I didn't confront him. I stood across the hall and watched. He saw me. His smile faltered. That was enough. Fear is not a scream, it's a pause. I walked out before he could decide whether to approach or run. 3 days later, the journalist called. "We're publishing Phase 1 tomorrow." Phase 1. Good. Storms roll in phases. That night, I sat at my rented desk with one dim lamp illuminating a stack of documents and wrote a list. Who wronged me? Developer. Judge. Notary. City inspector. Police liaison. And below it, how they fall: fraud. Conflict of interest. Unlawful eviction. document tampering, media pressure, public outrage, lawsuits, asset freeze. Anger turns men into animals. Strategy turns men into kings. The next morning, headlines bloomed like fire across the internet. Local development tied to illegal eviction. Documents leaked. Photo of the judge. Quotes. Dates. My address. My case number. Not my name. Never my name. Yet. They would know soon enough. But first they had to sweat. The phones in that company must have screamed. The mayor's office must have locked doors. And up in his glass office, the developer probably stared at headlines like a man watching his kingdom bleed. Good. I didn't need to see their panic. I could feel it in the air. But I wasn't finished. Justice isn't a moment, it's a dismantling. I looked at myself in the mirror, jaw unshaven, eyes sharp, posture steady. The man who left that house was broken. The man who returned was forged. Tomorrow phase 2 would begin. Court filings. Public statements. Audit requests. A lawsuit big enough to choke their investors. I whispered to my reflection. You built on stolen ground. Now you stand on borrowed time. And for the first time since losing my home, I slept without bitterness. Not because the fight was over, but because it had finally begun. They thought phase 1 was the storm. It was only the thunder. By sunrise, their PR department was choking. Statements released, retracted, rewritten. Words cannot patch concrete cracking under truth. I didn't show my face in public. Not yet. Anonymity was my armor and my advantage. Instead, I went to a quiet office building, not fancy, not suspicious, and met a lawyer who owed me nothing except professional respect. She read my files slowly, page by page. Her eyes sharpened. Calculating. Precise. You're going after a cartel of influence, she finally said. I'm going after what's mine, I replied. She nodded once, the kind of nod lawyers give when they've seen men lose but very few fight like this. We'll file civil suits. Real ones. Public. Loud. They can't bury this without burying themselves. I placed a flash drive on her desk. Emails. Leaked trails. Maps of illegal land zoning. Make it hurt, I said and walked out. On the street, winter bit my cheeks. But cold is irrelevant to a man burning inside. At the gas station that night, 2 black SUVs rolled up. Tinted windows. Engine idle like a warning heartbeat. A man stepped out, polished coat, quiet shoes, the scent of expensive confidence. You're making noise, he said. I'm just telling truth. In this city, truth isn't free. I paid for mine. He smiled, the kind of smile men wear when they still believe they are the hunters. You could have walked away. Started a new life. I did. It begins with ending yours. His smile slipped, barely but enough. He tapped on the roof twice and left. SUVs rolled away. They weren't here to fight. They were here to measure me. They found steel where they expected trembling. Good. By morning, the first lawsuit was filed. 2 hours later, my story appeared on a national news feed. The developer gave a press conference. Arrogant. Prepared. Dressed in the confidence of old money and old systems. He spoke to cameras. These accusations are lies. We follow the law. But his voice shook once. Barely noticeable. Unless you knew what fear sounds like when pride tries to bury it. People online were already digging, comparing signatures, maps, dates. Every thread they pulled unraveled another lie. Power bleeds quietly at first. Around noon, a stranger entered my station. Gray coat. Rough hands. Eyes like someone who saw wars nobody wrote about. He placed a folded piece of paper on the counter. You didn't hear this from me, he said and left. Inside, a photocopy. A bank transfer. Large. Sent to the judge's brother the same week of my eviction. Proof of corruption. It landed in my palm softly but weighed more than concrete. I didn't question who he was. Every fight calls allies from the shadows. Men who hate injustice not with words but with memory. That night I went to the hill above my stolen home. Lights glowed across the construction like a city of steel and lies. I stood there alone, but I did not feel lonely. Warriors walk alone until others decide to follow. I imagined a courtroom. The judge stripped of his robe. The developer explaining himself under oath. The notary trembling. Flash cameras. Their names turning from symbols of authority to synonyms of disgrace. Revenge is not the strike. Revenge is the ruin. Suddenly, footsteps behind me. Slow. Measured. I turned. A man in a dark jacket, scarf covering half his face, but eyes visible. You think paperwork wins? He murmured. Paper stole my home. Paper will rebuild it. You're making enemies. I'm making truth unavoidable. He stepped closer. People disappear over less. I already disappeared. This is me returning. He held my gaze. A silent standoff between threat and conviction. Then he nodded once, respect or warning or both, and walked away. If they wanted fear, they arrived too late. I used fear as fuel months ago. The next morning, the journalist called again, voice glowing with adrenaline. The Anti-Corruption Bureau opened a preliminary investigation. They're requesting statements. They'll get documents instead, I replied. We might win. No. We will win. Then she said something unexpected. You're dangerous. Only to those who thought I was harmless. Silence. Then a quiet exhale, admiration mixed with caution. Later I went to the municipal archives. Old building, dust in the air, fluorescent lights humming like tired bees. I requested land registry files for the properties surrounding mine. Not one. Not two. 7 illegal transfers. A network, not an accident. This wasn't just my story. This was a system, rotted, polished, smiling. And it was cracking. As I walked out, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. A voice whispered, "You don't understand who you're fighting." "I don't need to," I answered. "They'll understand me." "You think law protects you?" "No." "Then what does?" "Public truth." Pause. Then a soft chuckle, cold, patronizing, fearful. "You're already dead. You just haven't fallen yet." Click. I stared at the phone, unbothered. They still believed they could scare me. Fear is a currency paid by the unprepared. I was beyond death. That night, I drafted a video statement. Not dramatic, not emotional. Simple truth recorded in one take under one bulb in my room above the mechanic's shop. My name is not important. What matters is justice. They took what was mine. They took what was ours. They will return it not by choice but by consequence. This fight is not personal revenge. It is public correction. No rage. No threats. Just certainty. I didn't publish it yet. Timing is power. And power must be sequenced. Tomorrow I would deliver documents to the Bureau. After that, public testimony. Then asset freeze requests. Piece by piece they would collapse. Systems don't fall with explosions. They fall with signatures. And I already held the pen. The night ended quiet, streetlights trembling in winter wind. I sat by the window and whispered to the silent city. You stole the land beneath my feet. Now I will take the ground beneath your empire. Not hope. Not fantasy. Just promise. Phase 3 begins soon. They told me men like me break. That's what everyone said when they passed by my empty porch and pretended not to know my name. They said it because they wanted to believe it, because believing it made them safe. They were wrong. Phase 3 moved faster than I let anyone think it would. The Bureau called me in the day after I walked into their office with a leather folder and a face that refused to ask for mercy. Their questions were clinical, precise. Their pens trembled only once, when I handed them a bank slip that traced a river of money from the developer's account straight to the judge's brother. Evidence convinces people who still want to believe. It drowns the rest. Within 72 hours, subpoenas rolled out like a winter tide. Phones were seized. Servers frozen. The mayor's calendar became a public map for investigators. The developer's investors demanded emergency meetings. The man who once smiled at my ruin now looked like someone who had forgotten the shape of his hands. I watched it all through the small window above the mechanic's shop. News crawls scrolled names, photos, allegations. My face never showed. I had no interest in spectacle. Spectacle feeds the circus. I wanted collapse. The first courtroom day arrived with more cameras than the mayor's office had budgets for. Reporters clustered like birds, searching for the first crumb of confession or the first crack of defiance. The courtroom smelled of old varnish and new fear. The judge who once signed my eviction sat on the bench, but his robe hung on him like a costume he hadn't rehearsed for. He cleared his throat. His eyes flicked toward the gallery, toward the camera bank, toward the dozens of citizens who had gathered because finally, someone had given them proof. My lawyer spoke with the calm of a priest reading scripture to the faithful. She laid out the paper trail, the forged endorsements, the emails that tied signatures to midnight meetings, the notary who had stamped documents from a home address that belonged to a man across town with no clerical license. The defense sputtered. Bluster became malformation under cross-examination. Men who had once leaned on money as armor now flinched at questions they could not answer. I sat back and let it happen. I let each revelation be the shovel that dug their graves. I kept my face neutral. Emotion would have been an unnecessary flourish. I was not there for catharsis. I was there for closure. On day 3, the developer took the stand. He tried the easy tactic, denial wrapped in outrage. He smiled for cameras at first, but the smile slipped when the prosecutor displayed a transfer record showing a payment for consultation to a shell company whose director was the judge's brother. "How do you explain this?" the prosecutor asked, voice flat as a blade. The developer's answers came like a man reading someone else's script. Investors called his counsel mid-testimony. Phones buzzed like bees in a jar. The gallery stirred. A woman in the front rows, someone who had watched the bulldozers drive across her neighbor's garden, began to weep quietly. Her tears were not for me, they were for the system that thought itself untouchable. The collapse was not a sudden explosion. It was a chorus of tiny admissions, each one a snapping bone. The mayor resigned in a hush before cameras could put words to it. The judge was escorted out by officers with hands that did not tremble. The developer tried to flee the country a week later. His passport was seized at the airport. He sat in a cell for the first night and tasted a fear he had never known, the loss of immunity. And the construction site, I watched it blocked by police tape, machines idle like confiscated beasts. Investors withdrew. Contractors sued the developer for unpaid wages. The company that had promised prosperity filed for bankruptcy protection. The concrete they had poured hardened into evidence. The foundations they had laid became monuments to their greed. It did not erase the months I had spent in an empty room, counting breaths. It did not bring back a single Sunday breakfast in my old kitchen. But what it did was public and permanent. It made restitution possible. Restitution came slowly and in forms I had not expected. A court ordered the developer's assets frozen. A trustee was appointed to assess claims. The city held hearings. People I had never spoken to, neighbors, a woman who ran the bakery next door, the old man who mended fences, gave statements. They told small truths that, stitched together, became undeniable. The final hearing was not a spectacle. It was a ledger. Papers. Signatures. Judges who now had reason to be careful. When the trustee signed the final transfer back to my name, the room held its breath like a crowd before a verdict. I remember the moment the clerk pronounced the order. My hands were steady. I did not shout. I walked out of the courthouse the same way I had walked in, head level, steps measured. The keys were handed to me by an official clumsy with apology. I did not accept his sorrow. I accepted the metal weight of a truth returned. The house smelled of stale air and dust the first time I stepped through the door. The floor sagged in the places my father's boots had worn. My daughter's old swing still hung from the porch beam, a thin line of rope frayed by months of wind. I did not cry. Not then. Tears would come later, in small places, at the sight of my father's old toolbox, at the first repaired window, at the way light found the kitchen table just as it used to. They had tried to erase me with documents and signatures. I answered them with the same materials but sharpened by patience and public will. Law is a tool. So is truth. I used both and they proved more effective than rage. People came back. The bakery reopened. The old man painted his fence. The kids started leaving bikes on the lane again. Life, stubborn as spring, returned. The construction site became a memorial of sorts, a fenced-in patch of silent iron where promises had been sold and found wanting. There were consequences beyond my land. Men who had once smiled in town meetings were gone from them. Careers ended. Families of fortune rearranged their lives. The judge faced legal charges. The developer will sit in a courtroom again, this time for criminal charges. That is not my pleasure, it is the natural order of consequence. On my porch, the first night I slept in my bed again, the house creaked with old claims and new hope. I stood at the window and watched the small town breathe. Wolves do not cry at victory. They stand guard. I had thought for a time that revenge would be a fire that burned everything. But what I built was not blaze, it was restoration. A man who loses home to greed learns that taking something back is quiet work. It is filing motions, it is coaxing reporters, it is convincing men who have forgotten their duty to remember it. Justice, I learned, is not the same as revenge. Revenge seeks to wound. Justice seeks to correct. Sometimes they meet. Sometimes, for those who were reckless enough to steal without consequence, justice looks like revenge because it hurts. I placed the key on the kitchen table and sat down for the first meal in months. Bread. Cheese. Strong, grounding things. Outside a dog barked. Somewhere distant a child laughed. I did not celebrate. I closed my eyes and breathed the house in. It was mine again, not because I had taken it by force, but because the truth had been heavy enough to move governments and greedy men alike. They thought they had buried me. They had only planted what would grow into something else. A man who remembered, who waited, who used the system against itself. I had come back not to terrorize but to correct. The town would talk. The cameras would write. New men would sit in old chairs and find they were smaller than the offices. At dusk I walked the boundary of my land. The soil was still cold. I pressed my palm into it and felt the history of my family under my skin. It was not a victory shouted. It was a hand laid gently back on what's yours. Wolves remember. The town remembers. I remember. And when the seasons turn and new men pass through, this house will stand as proof that silence can be a weapon, patience a strategy, and truth a hammer.